Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please look us up on your favorite podcast app, subscribe, like, and share so that you never miss an episode. If you'd like to further support us, visit patreon.com/speakingout and check out the different rewards. You'll find exclusive rewards if you sign up as a patron of the podcast. Thank you for your support, and let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's episode. Thank you to our patrons who make this podcast possible. You guys are awesome. Your support is incredible, and we always invite people to sign up and become patrons. Visit patreon.com/speakingout, and of course, we want to highlight our tier where we do a monthly Zoom called the Book Club.
I'm going to try to talk, Jimmy, with
Do
a
it.
scratchy voice here due to allergies, but spring is here. You're right. Our book club tier is special to us because we get to interact so much with our patrons. We encourage you to check out the patron page and to see the different things that you'll get by being a patron. We promise you will not be disappointed.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, last week we talked about mandated reporters and these the teachers in Midland, Texas at Midland Christian School. 5 of them who were arrested. They were charged for failure to report, and I forget what the exact charges were, but like conspiracy to cover up abuse or something like that.
Right.
What was interesting is after we recorded that, I looked up the news, and there were 4 more teachers from another school in Midland, Texas, who were also arrested for failure to report. So, first of all, kudos to the Midland Police Department for taking this seriously. We were talking about mandated reporters, and you know, we pretty much emphasized that people who are mandated reporters who fail to report and go out of their way to cover up abuse, like what allegedly happened at Midland Christian, they should be charged with criminal charges. They should go to jail. They should be made an example for not reporting. With that said, we had gotten an email from somebody who said, well, you know, that's pretty cut and dry for mandated reporters, but for the spouses of abusers, it's not as cut and dry. And so that kind of elicited a lot of strong emotions for this listener. And you know, I think it's worth spending a whole episode talking about that.
I do too, Jimmy. It's important because having been the spouse of an abuser, it's a tough position to be in.
Yeah.
It really, really is. And, you know, as we dig into this deeper, we'll explain more why it isn't so cut and dry for the spouses of abusers.
Yeah, I think, you know, as in your case, in the case of so many thousands and thousands, or probably tens or even hundreds of thousands of other spouses of abusers, you lived for how many years you were married to him and had no idea.
36 years.
Yeah,
and
had no idea that he was sexually abusing children.
Positively, no idea. That being said, I did blog on my blog post about noticing odd behavior. Now, by odd behavior, it was nothing that would link that behavior to child abuse. It was just an odd personality type of behavior, doing really strange things from the pulpit, throwing firecrackers from the pulpit, slamming a Bible down on the floor and stomping on it in the middle of a sermon, hiding chairs from the altar, you know, things like that were like, what in the world is that about? So it was nothing that would connect the dots to child abuse. But now that we have education out there, now that we know more, now that you've done training after training after training, it makes it a little bit different because we're more aware that abuse happens in the homes. It wasn't even on my radar, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it wasn't on any of ours.
No, never even thought about it. It was not even an inkling of a thought. But now spouses are aware. Everybody's aware. We would have to be deaf to everything to not be aware that abuse happens in the home. So that puts a different light on things.
Well, I think too, one of the things that spouses really wrestle with is, when you see these oddities, when you see, the firecrackers being thrown from the pulpit, and just the weird things. I think it probably does something to you inside where it makes you really frustrated, and you feel the weight of being under that person's control, and the manipulation and things like that. I certainly experienced that. When my dad lived with me for 2 years as an adult. I mean, we were exhausted. My wife and I were physically and emotionally exhausted, but never did we say, "I'll bet he's molesting children."
No.
It just was this. It was this constant battle of emotions, and him toying with us and doing things that were little subtle things, but it was enough that there was this compound issue where we just felt constantly drained and
Always
exhausted.
breaking boundaries.
Yes.
Always
Yes.
breaking boundaries.
Yes.
No matter how small or how big. It was just going 10 steps beyond.
Yes.
And you don't know what's going on, and it is frustrating, but it's beyond frustrating. You hit the word when you said it's exhausting.
Yeah.
It's physically and mentally exhausting to deal with a person like that. And honestly, I think, excuse me, I think that's part of the, as you call it, the testing all along. But until we're aware of it, we have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, I'm going to break this up into two different categories for spouses of abusers, because and there's a whole spectrum, I think, in between. But at the two ends of this spectrum, you have spouses that are just continually worn down, and they don't know that their spouse is an abuser, and there are kind of indications there, but they don't know how to properly interpret those, so they're just kind of humming along, and they see things, and it's not really reportable. It's not like there's this light bulb where they're like, I need to report this to the police. And then you have the other end of the spectrum where there's clear evidence that there's been abuse, but they're terrified to report because they're under the control of the abuser.
Right.
So,
Absolutely.
we'll start with the one end of the spectrum. When you see these little subtleties, which is where you were for most of your marriage.
Right. Most of our married lives.
How did you navigate that? How did you walk through, like, looking back now in hindsight, what would be some of your tips for spouses who are in this situation where they just constantly feel wiped out, manipulated, and exhausted, but there's not really a sign maybe that there's
As I
sexual abuse going on?
mentioned to you, it took years and years and years of tears. I would ask him, why did you do this? Why? Things he did were embarrassing. It was something
Embarrassing to you.
embarrassing
Not-
to me.
not to him.
Yeah, and never to him.
Right.
No, very embarrassing to me.
Which I think is a big red flag.
Exactly, that I know now. But the manipulation, the stronghold that he had on me, as I know so many other spouses experience, was unbelievable until I began pulling away a little bit emotionally and I could see more clearly. I would report to him everything, including when I was walking down the hall to go use the bathroom. And without realizing it, I never realized I did that. I'd say, I'll be back in 2 minutes. I just got to run down the hall and, use the bathroom. And now when you begin emotionally pulling away, you think, why am I doing that? Well, that's because that person knows everything about you, wants to know, and control everything about you. The notes that were left on the table, you need to. You need to do this today. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then he would check. He would call. Check. Did you do this? Did you call this person? Did you do that? Those are all red flags that something's not right in a relationship, in a right relationship. You don't have that going on. It was an
No,
element
no,
of,
and I can say from
right,
somebody who's in a normal
right.
relationship, like I never, ever, ever feel intimidated,
No,
scared. Nor does my wife ever
right.
feel intimidated or scared or afraid to share our feelings, afraid to say
Exactly.
what's on your mind.
Exactly. Right.
Have any need to hide anything. Everything's wide open. Our bank accounts are they're
Right.
shared bank
That's
accounts. Not saying that everybody has to have shared bank accounts or your spouse is hiding something, but everything's transparent.
I'm glad. Keep going, and then I want to add something to that. That was a huge thing that I never realized until
Yeah,
later.
I mean our accounts. We have a shared photo account. So many shared accounts.
Right.
Also, access to each other's
Okay.
accounts. We
Right.
have we have on our phone a keeper app that lists. We have a folder for me and a folder for my wife, and then we list all of the passwords for every single account,
So,
every email address. I only have two email addresses that I use, but email
right.
addresses, everything,
Right.
every account that I have, period. My wife has full and complete access
What
to,
that tells
and
me
vice
is
versa.
there is no secrecy and there is a huge element of trust within your relationship. Within a relationship that is abusive, which was mine, there was not trust on his part, and there was secrecy galore to the point even where I was not allowed to use his car because he said his car was his working office, which it was for insurance, but it also was for abuse, which you boys
Yeah, I wrote about
found
that in
out
the
later.
book.
You wrote about it in your book, which the book is incredible. I'll put a plug in there again that if you have not read Jimmy's book, you need to get a copy of the book. Jimmy, where can they get this book?
I was just on Amazon. Yeah,
Okay,
The Devil
okay.
Inside.
The Devil Inside. You can order it and get it. I highly recommend. But there was this element of secrecy throughout our entire marriage that now when I look back, I think, I can't believe this. His office was locked at all times. I was never allowed to go in it. And it's interesting, I never had a key. And I knew not to ask for one because that was his office. His computer was his computer. I was never allowed to access that, although he was forever on my computer. It was not anything shared. There were secrets galore, and now I know that is an enormous red flag and
Yeah.
also a very, very big part of manipulation. Very, very big. I
Yes.
never fought against that. I never pushed it. Never.
Well, I want to ask this, like, as you're talking, because I witnessed that separation, and it was hell.
Yeah.
I think mostly for you, and I think for him, he played on that
Oh yeah.
definitely to us kids
Yeah.
to say, I don't know what got into your mother. She's
Right.
she's pulling herself away. I think we're on the verge of separation,
Right.
which incidentally is how my dad wound up living with my wife and I
Right.
as
Yeah.
newlyweds
Right.
for
Right.
2 years
We had separated
because we
and
felt bad for him.
right. Oh my yeah.
So on your part, when you began that separation, that emotional separation,
Right.
not physical,
It was never
but
intended to be a physical separation, by the way. I put myself into counseling, into therapy. I got to a point of where I was so depressed and so low in life, didn't know why. I just knew I needed help. When I got the courage, and by the way, it took me 2 solid years to even make a phone call to get help. But when that began, I began to pull back emotionally from your dad.
well, when that happened, how clearly did things start to come into focus? Again, I know you didn't know about the sexual
No,
abuse, but as far as the manipulation, and him just being narcissistic and all that stuff, how clearly did that come into focus, and how quickly did that come into
it
focus?
came in very quickly into focus. What made it especially difficult for me though was he was never mean. Like he didn't raise his voice.
Yeah.
He never used anger with me ever until the very end when I separated our taxes, which was interesting. That's when he showed a side of him I had never seen before. But he was always very gentle, very kind, very, looked like that forlorn, pitiful person, like he was wounded, if when I wasn't speaking, and it just, he went around with this bleeding heart. But that wasn't who he was. And it wasn't until I got into therapy and my therapist began having me journal.
I think
Journal,
journaling is so,
right.
so important.
And then she would have me go over that with her. And when I would read that out loud, how my week went, it shocked me. It totally shocked me how I was living. It really
Yeah.
did. I had no wiggle room, no room. I was boxed into this little box controlled by him.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize it until I was strong enough. And it takes a lot of strength, by the way, to get yourself into therapy. It's not, for most people, it's not an easy thing to do. It surely wasn't for me. And I was so low, zero self-esteem, so low at that point. But that focus, and I love how you use that word, as you began to focus, it was crystal clear there was something really wrong with this marriage. Very, very wrong from the beginning. What that was, even the therapist, she contacted me after the abuse was made public. And she said, I never picked up on that by what you were saying. Of course she didn't. I didn't know.
Right.
There were no clues to that.
Yeah.
But the other clues were there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's so important. I think for me, that's the big takeaway from your perspective is getting that emotional
Detachment. You have to.
And we experienced that on a lesser degree, my wife and I. Whenever we bought the house, and again, I wrote about this in the book, but we bought our house that we're in now. We bought that in 2009. 2 years later, Alex was disclosing to us that he was an abuser.
Right.
For me, once we moved into our house and he didn't come with us by command of my wife, rightfully, she said, "We're buying this house, and your dad is not coming with it."
I'm so glad she said
and
that.
that was that was our separation.
Right.
When that happened, it wasn't until I moved into our house that I realized how incredibly disgustingly manipulating he was. And it was like this big light bulb. For me, it came into focus. I mean, within 2 months of buying our house and being out from under the same roof as him, that I was like, holy cow, was he and still is manipulating me like
into
a
every
madman.
Crack and crevice of your life.
Yeah.
Wasn't he?
It would be things like this. And I'll give an example. He would come over and offer to come over. I had this massive trees, like 3 massive trees taken down. I had to cut them all and split them. I'm talking like, a tractor trailer load of firewood.
Right.
It was a lot of cutting and splitting. He would come over for hours and volunteer to work. And we talk about this in trainings, but when somebody truly is volunteering their time or volunteering to do something, they never ask for reciprocation.
Right.
They never ask for a favor in return.
You were right.
People who do favors, people who help people who volunteer, they do it and they expect nothing in return, including a thank you.
Yes.
They expect literally nothing in return.
Absolutely.
For him, he would come up for hours at a time, and I never asked him. He would just come up and help me cut and split. And then he would say, a couple days into this, he'd be like, "Oh, by the way, my brakes on the car are bad. You think you can help me fix the brakes?" Well, here he had just spent 10 plus hours helping me split wood, excruciatingly, labor intensive.
Yes.
So I was like, yeah, I mean, it takes me an hour tops to do a brake job. So I was like, yeah, no problem. And then he slips in, "Oh, yeah, I'm almost ashamed to admit this, but I don't have money to buy my brakes."
There was
He wasn't
always
asking me to buy his brakes. But he
Yeah.
was seeing, would I step in and do it? And I did.
And, well, of
And
course.
my wife was
Yeah.
so livid with me.
Yeah.
And she was like, you're an idiot. You keep falling for it over. I'm telling you, your dad is manipulating
And
you.
all these things would get bigger and bigger, by the way.
Yes.
They were never
Always
easier.
got bigger.
Always bigger and bigger and bigger. Yes. And the demands were in such a way that you were made to feel guilty if you didn't meet the
Absolutely.
demands.
After
So-
all, you know,
Right.
this poor old man,
Right.
you know, in his 60s is out here busting his
Mm-hmm.
rump, you know, cutting wood and splitting wood. And that really worked on
Well,
me.
sure it does. Of course it does, because you are a giving person.
Yeah.
You are a servant who does that type of thing with no expectation
Yeah.
of anything in return.
So I think for that category,
Right.
and I want to give us time to talk about the other, you know, for that category, I would say, you know, for spouses, if you find yourself exhausted, if you find yourself constantly questioning yourself, second guessing, and you know, almost like you're walking on eggshells constantly,
Right. All the time.
start to pull away emotionally. I'm not saying, you know, you have to separate and, you know, have this dramatic
No,
separation.
we were living together
just-
when
right.
I was in therapy.
Absolutely.
We were still together,
But
but
just
that's
detach yourself emotionally from that
Yes.
person.
so that you can see clearly.
Yeah.
That's all.
And I like the idea of journaling.
Yeah, and journaling was fantastic because there I had written, and you know, you're using the word exhausting. That was over and over and over written. I'm so exhausted.
Yes.
I'm so exhausted.
Yeah.
And then it begins to click. What are you exhausted from? Well,
Yeah.
I was walking on eggshells, everything. I had to report everything in my life. And, you know, it's weird. There were no repercussions like a beating, like some women get, which there again, we know physical violence happens in the home, physical abuse.
Yeah.
There was never that. It was mental. It was
Yeah.
all mental. And when you mentioned, Jimmy, that when we separated, it all began to unravel for him, it did, because he had a tightly knit little sweet thing going on with me. I was he always called it the glue that held everybody together, and it's true.
Yeah.
When mom was okay, everything was okay, meaning he was okay. He was okay. He had freedom for everything.
Yeah.
Freedom, and a backup, a wife who supported him in
Yeah.
everything. So,
Yeah, that is interesting. And I think that definitely laid the groundwork to get us to the point where when Alex
Oh,
disclosed to
yeah.
us, you and I didn't hesitate.
No.
There was no second guessing.
None.
There was no, what if this is wrong? What if she got mixed up?
Yep.
What if she's,
No.
because there were not a
No.
lot of details that she
No.
gave us at
Not
all.
at all.
Like there was not
no.
explicit graphic details of abuse. We didn't have any of that.
I wrote about that, Jimmy, and I also journaled about that moment. And honestly, it was like a neon light came on, and it was like all the dots immediately connected. Everything connected.
Same for me.
Everything made sense in
Same-
that
in a
moment.
second.
Yes.
In a second.
In that moment when Alex disclosed,
Yep.
everything came together.
And then it was like, why didn't we see this?
Right.
Why didn't we
Well,
see this before?
we-
So, you know, I think we were in that fortunate position where, although many people, innocent people, were abused under our watch,
Right.
and we didn't see it, we
No.
didn't know, we had the fortunate advantage to where there was a very clear allegation of abuse,
Right.
disclosure of abuse. It was crystal clear.
It
and
was, and we had begun that emotional distancing at that
So
point.
it wasn't hard for us to make
So,
that. I mean,
right.
I say it wasn't hard. It was very hard, but we weren't trapped where
No.
we
Right.
could not make a report.
Exactly.
You and I had the freedom
We did.
to walk right into that police
The
station.
freedom and the strength.
And the
it
strength.
did take strength. And I think the reason we did was because we had gone through what we had gone through and then began that distancing and then was like bingo.
I
The
mean,
light-
it was
yeah,
the
it was.
instant
It was
light bulb
for both
came
of
on.
us.
Yeah.
For both of us.
We're like, holy cow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Of course that's what he's been doing.
Exactly.
So, you know, that leads me to people who are in that position where, say that they're a spouse of an abuser, one of their children discloses abuse, and they are so scared and so entrapped or so wrapped up in this whole manipulation that they think their child is mistaking. What do we do with that? Because we were pretty pretty harsh towards mandated reporters, and I will always continue to be.
Right.
If somebody's a school teacher, a therapist, a clergy, you name it. If they're a mandated reporter and somebody comes to them and says, I've been abused, they have to report if
Exactly.
that person is a minor.
Right.
So, that puts us in this bizarre category where what about a spouse whose child discloses to them and they're completely living in fear, intimidation, maybe there's physical violence, maybe there's financial abuse where they don't have access to any of the banking information.
Right. Right.
If they left the house, they would immediately be homeless. That's a reality.
It is a reality.
What do you
It's
do
a
with
sad
that?
reality. Sadly, we know what the majority of people do, and that is stay in that situation because they feel so trapped.
And I'll say this as an interjection here. I can't speak for you, but I have a lot of compassion
I
and
do.
grace
Oh, my.
for spouses who are in that
I
situation.
do.
I would never look at them and be like, well, why didn't you report? You report no matter what. It's not that black and white
Right.
when you're trapped in that situation. And a spouse of an abuser is not a mandated reporter. It's not illegal for them not to report. It's a very, 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 very complicated situation.
It's so hard,
when there's a
and-
spouse
and,
who's
yeah.
under that control of the abuser.
We don't want people to think, okay, now you're getting wishy-washy on reporting. Absolutely not. There
No,
are things
but
that
it's-
go on in homes. I know for a fact some abusers are not, most, I would say, are not like your dad, where
Right.
he was mild-tempered and never showed anger.
Right.
Many do show anger, use threats of using a gun on the spouse or the child.
Yeah.
There are definite threats, harmful threats that often go with the fear of telling. So both on the part of the child and the spouse. So it becomes extremely complicated. And that's where I say again, though, if the spouse can do some mental, emotional distancing to come up with a safe plan
Yeah.
and have it in place. And there is help available. There are, agencies out there now who do help victims of abuse. If you get to that, point and you're sure, that this is what you need to do, you need to do it
Yeah.
because it just gets worse and worse.
And I will say too, and I hate to even mention this, but it is so, so, so important. The abuser has in his toolkit, always has in his toolkit this ACE card that says this woman is crazy.
Yeah.
I can give you 100 examples where she lost absolute control, and that may be true. Not that you're crazy,
No,
but that
but
you
that
lost
they-
control, because
right.
who of us doesn't lose control every now and then?
when
And they will pull that card out
yeah.
the minute, the second that they find out. Hopefully they don't find out that you're the one reporting, but the minute they even suspect it, they're going to pull that card out and say, I want a mental evaluation of this woman.
I know case after case, sadly, where that happens. It happened, is happening right now to a friend of mine, by the way. She's petrified because she said, I don't think I'm going to get my children. I think he has the money. He has an attorney friend. And he said he's going to say I'm crazy.
I've lost count
yeah.
of how many emails and messages that I've gotten from women
Right.
with that exact
Yeah.
message. I'm so
It's
terrified
and
that
you're
he's going to
right.
get full custody of the
Right.
kids, and don't think they won't try it.
And well, and then that makes it worse.
Mm-hmm.
Or split custody, where
Mm-hmm.
mom is no longer then in the home with the
To
child
act
to
as a
give,
buffer.
right, to
Yeah.
give some sort of support. So what we're saying is it becomes a very complicated thing in cases like that, whether the spouse reports immediately, later, or not at all, because she's got to worry about, am I with my child? Am I
Mm-hmm.
going to have that child taken from me? And then that child will be full blown 100% with the abuser.
Mm-hmm.
And these are very real things that happen. Our
Yeah.
court system, although we had a good court system helping us, is not always that way.
Ours was hands down
Ours
best
was
case scenario.
magnificent start to finish,
Yeah.
flawless.
Yeah.
Midland, Texas, what they're going through right now, they have great law enforcement system. That's not true in all cities.
Yeah. I
Not at
think
all.
probably it's the norm to not have a
Right.
very, I don't want to say good, but a very smooth
Transition
process
through the
through the
process.
legal system.
Right, right.
So it's like a roller coaster ride, and you never know what's going to work, what's not going to work, and and that's exhausting. So I would say to the spouses, make sure that when you're building that support system, start with the emotional detachment,
Right.
but as you're building that support system, make sure that you are doing it so textbook carefully,
Right.
not, and again, I hate saying this, but not letting your emotions take you out of control. Have a plan in place, and don't worry about making it happen right now. It doesn't work
Right.
that way.
I think that's what's
it
good
could
about
take a
a
year.
therapist, because they're bound by
Mm-hmm.
confidentiality, and you can speak what
Yes.
you have to speak and know that you're safe doing so.
Yeah.
And it's nice to have that other person who's not emotionally involved
Mm-hmm.
helping you walk through the process.
Yeah.
That helped me tremendously.
Yeah.
Really, really did.
But I mean, it almost has to boil down to a complete checklist
It
of
does.
thinking of every
Yeah.
scenario
Oh, yeah.
and
Yes.
flow charts and you know talk to people. Go online and look at chat boards. Talk to survivors who have walked through this path, because you're not alone. I mean,
Right.
this happens way too often.
Read books. I mean, and if
Yeah.
you don't have the money to do that, there are free Kindle books. I keep thinking that app is
Yeah.
free to everyone. You try to think of all these different things, because not everybody has access to money. Not everybody has access to friends. When homes are really controlled, spouse can't always get out and spend coffee time with a friend.
Right.
It's tough. We understand that. It is not easy, but the rewards of doing what Jimmy's saying, of emotionally detaching a bit to where you can focus and see more clearly, get your thoughts together. It's awesome what will happen. The strength you will receive,
Yeah.
really.
And I would just recommend keep building that support system, and don't
Yeah.
get weighed down with this gut punch, and it will be, and it probably is for many of you, this gut punch of guilt for not
Right.
reporting and getting law enforcement to
Immediately,
step in
right,
immediately. You may not have that option right now. And
Safety
and
first.
possibly
I
the
just
safest.
always- yeah.
I mean, possibly the safest avenue right now is to stay alive. That's the reality
Keep your
for
child
some
alive.
people.
Right, both.
So, start working on that support system. Start talking to experts. Start talking to people who have been through this journey before, and find out, like, what is the next step? Where do I even start? And that can be overwhelming, which is why you need help.
Right.
You need to get people to talk to you and help
As
process
we're
through
talking,
this.
Jimmy, I'm thinking that it might be wise for you and I to sit down at some point in the very near future and come up with a safety list, a checkpoint list for spouses who want to report, who feel they need to report, who know they should report,
what to expect,
but don't know.
Yep. From the courts, and that, and again, that's very fluid.
Right.
But at least it can give you some guidance on what to expect from the courts, what to expect from the abuser, what to expect from friends and family. There are so many different components, and that's why it's so complicated. And I'm glad that this question came up because, last week we spoke in very clear-cut terms, and I do think that when you're a professional in that position, and somebody comes or you hear of an allegation of abuse, it's so cut
you
and
have
dry.
to legally, it's there. Report. If a child goes to a school nurse and says, I'm being abused at home, or I got abused in the locker room or whatever, and that nurse doesn't report, that's a criminal. That's breaking of the law. That's it, cut and dried. That's not for her to investigate, and she's not in a position of being manipulated.
That's right.
That person can pick up the phone and report.
That's right.
Period. And let the legal system take care of it.
Yeah.
That's the proper process. This is something entirely different that we're talking about today. Hopefully, we've said some things that will stir within you some courage and some strength to begin that checklist if you're in that position of, I don't know what to do, feeling so trapped, so exhausted, so mentally tired, so just in such pain, and it is a painful position to be in, of not knowing what to do. What is your next best step? What can you do? So, Jimmy, I think you and I need to work on something too.
I do too, and we'll put a couple of resources too in the description of this. But hang in there.
Yes.
This is it's a heavy thing for people to experience when you know that abuse has taken place.
Right.
And you know that reporting it will change the rest of your life forever. It's terrifying. We recognize that. And hang in there. Really, honestly, truthfully, hang in there. And we'll provide as many resources as we can to help with that process too. But thank you all for tuning into this episode. I hope you found this helpful, and we'll catch you next round.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. A special thank you to our patrons who make this podcast possible. Please help us get the word out by searching for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. Please consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron and check out the rewards our patrons receive.